Please be patient. We are waiting for guests to arrive. Thank you.
How's it going?
Okay, we are streaming live right now, just so you know. We have to start at the time that it's advertised, so. It's okay. Okay.
It's everything you go through. We're streaming live already, so be quiet. He's downstairs. Yeah, I was like, no, they have to start channels to start at the other time.
Well, how are you?
See each other again.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're behind me.
No need to whisper. We are streaming live right now, but it's all part of the show.
Oh, we were instructed.
Oh, no worries. No worries at all.
So I'm happy to talk to you about it. We have someone who does suspense to partnership. So I don't know how you get into those things. I think it's really tough unless you're young. And you get hit more. You accept him with your reaction.
Hi, Chad. How you doing? Sorry. We got new toys. So I must tell you, we have one microphone. Okay. Grab it.
This one is Hey, how are you? So you.
Yes.
Hello, how are you? What's your name?
Very nice.
Oh my God!
Hungarian is nothing like it. Hungarian is different.
Yeah.
What happened with the second mic?
If there's interference between the signals.
You playing the logs?
No, I don't have
You should buy 2 mics for a situation like this so that you don't have any mics not back and forth. Or if you have a way to get them to the camera, so you should have 2 mics.
Yeah, just a receiver. For some reason, the wireless signals are crossing. Turned on 3 mics and they started feedback together.
Maybe there's some interference in the building.
Yeah, I'll have to test later. And I'll see what.
Are you on for the drinks? No, I just came.
I know. See what's happening?
How are you?
Okay.
I have.
We're sitting up here, now you're down
I know, it's just, our last panel.
there. Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Why don't you all move over here, because we have a small crowd, and so we're gonna have a conversation. Okay, go get a drink.
I better go, I'm gonna go.
Yes, this is the ground report, drill on everything.
Just go over downstairs.
I'm guessing that you need to.
If you're comfortable, fine, but it might be nicer if everybody's on one side of the room, but Allan, you can. Allan can.
Create a better visual for the camera.
We're on. Oh, we're all on. We're live. We're live.
Yeah, if you're going on that side, yes.
Welcome, everybody. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Allan Dodds, a former president of the OPC. Very glad you're here, and we're really privileged to have a former Board of Governors member and OPC Prize winner, Roger Cohen, here to talk about his new book. He's had an OPC book night or two before, but he's written more other books. But this book, which you can buy right outside, is an absolutely fascinating book. And I'm going to read one line from it because I think it will set up the whole conversation. It's so multi-layered. It can be regarded as Roger's personal adventure, trying to rediscover his family life, or the entire culture of Western Europe since the turn of the century, the last century, the history of anti-Semitism in the Northern Hemisphere, and the Southern Hemisphere, I guess, if you count South Africa, which we do, as you will soon realize. It's just an astonishing turn of events. And I happen to have had a lot of intersections with Roger's experiences, and my guess is many of the people in the room will discover when they read the book that at some point or other, regardless of whether it's a personal experience Roger had or one of his relatives had, or his feelings about religion and the Arab-Israeli situation, you will find common ground. And maybe a lot to dispute. But nonetheless, no matter how you come out on that, I think you'll find it absolutely gripping. Here is from page 263. The only way back to mindfulness and wholeness has been writing down the world as I see it. Words alone bring me to a single voice, a unified being, and an inner peace. And I'm going to let him explain from there. So Roger, why don't we start by bringing us into your family, since this book's title really is about your mother, the girl from Human Street.
Well, thank you very much, Allan, and thank you all for coming. It's always a pleasure to come back to the Overseas Press Club. Well, I guess there are books that you choose to write and books that you have to write, and this one I had to write. It had been churning around inside me for quite a long time. I was going to write a book on Iran, and my editor at Knopf, John Siegel, said, you really want to write a book on Iran? That's a bit of a downer. Why don't you write a book about suicide, depression, displacement, loss, pain? Anyway, he prodded me toward this book. I grew up in England, a South African Jewish family, and my parents were immigrants, although that word was never pronounced. And I knew very little of my past, but my forebears, my grandparents and great-grandparents were Lithuanian Jews who emigrated to South Africa. About 90% of South African Jews are of Lithuanian descent. There was a big exodus from the Pale of Settlement due to pogroms between about 1885 and 1914. And my parents were both born in South Africa. My dad hated apartheid. He'd come to England as a young doctor at the end of World War II, and then they went back to South Africa. I spent the first 2 years of my life there, and then we moved to Britain. But I guess I'd pinpoint the moment when I really decided to write the book. My parents have a house in Wales, in central Wales. It's wild, it's windy, it's beautiful, the sun very rarely shines. My mother hated it, and my mother always craved the sun. I think my dad punished her by buying that house. He loved it because he loved nature and the wild, and he was a remarkable gardener. And even though there's only 5 days of sunlight a year, he conjured this beautiful. It's changed a bit. But anyway, I was up there once, about almost exactly 10 years ago, and I went into the It's a box in the attic story. I went into the attic and there was a box which I hadn't seen before, and I opened it. And in it were my mother's 2 suicide notes, one from 1978, one from 1982. On both occasions, she survived just. And there was my father's attestations as a doctor and as a husband of these years of agony, what had happened when, what medication she'd been on, how he tried to respond. And there were letters from my mother, often about how they would begin again and they would recover from this. And she would vanquish this terrible manic depressive state. And there was a family tree that my father, obviously in a moment of great pain, had put together, and he put a black dot next to each member of the family who suffered from bipolar disorder or mental illness. And there were more relatives with black dots beside their names and without. And I guess 2 things came together. I wanted to tell this because I didn't know really the story of my mother, and I felt the story of my mother, but I didn't know it, and I wanted to find it out. But behind that family story, there was a broader story of displacement, of upheaval, of leaving home behind in every one generation from Lithuania to South Africa, another from South Africa to Britain. I am now an American citizen from Britain to the US, and part of the family was Zionists who went to Israel. And to me, it became clear that there was an association, at least I felt there was, between this repetitive upheaval and the mental pain that had afflicted my mother. So I wanted to tell a broad story of a Jewish odyssey of the 20th century. There are many like it, and many. It's called The Girl from Human Street. It's not The Girl from Jewish Street. I mean, this is a broader story than that, I hope. But clearly, this odyssey, Jewish odyssey of the 20th century, is. I mean, my family's took a particular direction, but it's very widely shared. So the book attempts to be both, as you said, both personal and very broad in extent. People will judge for themselves whether they think the narrative holds together. The structure of it was something I worked a lot on. I mean, I'm satisfied that it does, but there are many. I mean, there's identity, belonging, Jewish identity, Zionism, Israel, and there's 2 or 3 chapters set in South Africa which address the issue of apartheid and how Jews responded to apartheid.
Let me ask you about one of the things you did about structuring the narrative. If I recall correctly, you were only 3 when your mother first attempted suicide. How did you manage? I mean, well, with all that you now know you did not know, what were your struggles with your mother? I know you've gone into them, but please tell everybody.
Well, that's not quite right what you said. My mother didn't try to commit suicide until 1978 when I was 22. Well, what happened when I was 3, and you're right about that. Yeah, what happened when I was 3 was that I'd been born in London, lived there for 2 months, and then we went back to South Africa, and we lived in South Africa for 2 years. And my dad was the dean of the last surviving Black residence at the University of the Witwatersrand, the one residence where Black medical and other students were still allowed to attend, and he was the dean of that. And under apartheid, which was gathering pace and closing in, this residence was closed down, and there were no more Black students at the University of the Witwatersrand. And this was too much for my dad, and so they emigrated. And my mother was pregnant with my sister Jenny. My mother lived in privileged circumstances in South Africa. Her grandfather was a penniless migrant called Isaac Michael, who started, like most Jews in South Africa, as a traveling salesman, going from farms to homesteads, selling this and that. And then he had a store in a provincial town, then he had a store in downtown Johannesburg. And he ended up being a co-founder of the Macy's of South Africa, which was called the OK Bazaars. And that story is related in the book. And so my mother was plucked out of this close-knit Jewish community in Johannesburg, taken to post-war London. Rationing was still in place. They were living in a tiny apartment in North London, just putting coins in a meter to get hot water. And my sister was born, and she collapsed. It was then known as post-puerperal psychosis, now known as postpartum depression. And she had insulin shock treatment, which is a treatment that was subsequently completely discredited, which basically reduces you to a hyperglycemic, comatose state. And then they revive you, and they hope this jolts your brain in some way. And she said it was even worse than electroshock treatment. And then she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, the Holloway Institution, it's called, outside London. And I was not yet 3. So I obviously did not. I felt it. My mother went away for quite a long time. but I didn't know the exact circumstance of this, and I managed through the Freedom of Information Act in Britain to miraculously, a few fragments of her medical records survived. So I now know, as was in the Times piece on Sunday, that on July 30, 1958, and August 1, which was one day before my 3rd birthday, she was in a psychiatric institution having electricity. And it was very different then. It was more like one flew over the cuckoo's nest then than it is today. I mean, they would tie you down because your whole body shuddered. And so that's what was happening to my mother at that time. And I never knew that. It took me 50 years to find that out. It took writing this book to find that out.
What year was that?
1958. And then my mother came back, after a year and a half in and out of these institutions. She came back. I mean, I compare it in the book to being hollowed out like a tree struck by lightning. She was fragile. She was present. She was there. She, in moments was always very loving, but it was hard for her to express that love fully. But I didn't know anything about it. We didn't know anything about it until in my late teens, she started to come apart again, this time with bipolar disorder, manic depression. And that started when I was about 19, and when I was 22 was when she first tried to kill herself in a very, she was survived miraculously. So there was a lot that was unsaid, and there was, it's still there, although I think writing the book I'm satisfied now that I found out everything I could possibly find out about where my family came from, what happened to my mother.
How much was this bothering you during all this?
Pardon?
How much was your mother's condition disturbing the way you thought as you were growing up?
Well, I've thought about it more and more as I've grown older. I think it had a very, very powerful impact on me because my mother disappeared when I was very young. So it was very hard for me to trust in a loving relationship. And I deployed my imagination I was very successful as a schoolboy, and I did fine, but there was definite psychological damage from the disappearance of my mother. And she died in 1999, and her spirit has had enormous force, really. I've thought more and more of her, really. I mean, she hasn't faded away at all. And cancer, which she ultimately died of, was a derisory thing to her compared to mental illness. She was completely, it was a legitimate way out, as she once said to my sister. And she was completely strong and stoical and remarkable. And my father, who had begun another relationship, I mean, he stayed with my mother for 49 years, the last 20 of which she was not in good shape. So there was another level of concealment, which was my father's other life. But he was completely grief-stricken when my mother died. He crumpled several times. My mother was small, she was quite slight, but there was an immense force that emanated from her and has gone on emanating.
As you look at it now, what have you learned about being a father from your father's conduct? And how does it differ from what you thought at the time?
You asked the easy questions right now. Do you want me to lie down on the couch? Maybe I can stretch out in those 3 chairs over there. Well, I'm a guy who's been 3 times divorced, so I guess I haven't, sorted out every relationship exactly as I should have. I'm immensely proud of my 4 children, all of whom touched something. Fantastic kids, and 3 of them were at the book party last night. My oldest daughter's a doctor, and she's actually in psychiatry. I wonder why. And she's a psychiatrist, and she's at a conference at the I'm very impressed. She's got a hotel at the Waldorf for 5 nights or something. She is. And she just had a baby, so I'm now a grandfather. And, I think, I mean, kids want their parents to stay together, right? That's a basic urge of all children. They prefer not everything to their parents together, but just about anything. I mean, just about anything is better than their parents breaking up, I would say. But given that, I'm on very good terms with all my ex-wives, and I've just been on holiday in Brazil with my last ex-wife, and I'd stayed over Christmas with another, and I'm about to see the third in Los Angeles. So, I mean, I think I've done a few things right and a few things wrong, like most of us. But I've tried to be a good father. God knows I love my kids, and I'm sure I've failed in many ways, but I've tried to do the best I can, and I really feel that, concealment has happened to me, but I've done it. But it's very damaging. It saps you, and it saps the people around you. So, where possible, I don't really want that in my life anymore, definitely. So,
if we were talking about one thing that was maybe more constant than your mother's struggles, it would be the various strains of anti-Semitism that run through this life that you've lived.
Yeah, it's strange. I grew up, I had the best possible education you can have in England, a very good private school, Balliol College, Oxford. I did very well. But there was, like my mother was a transplant that didn't take in England. She always craved South Africa, the sun. And in some strange, I always used to say, people would ask me, why do you leave England? And I said, well, I got a job at Reuters, they sent me overseas, and I got a job at Wall Street. One thing led to another, and I left England. But it's not true. I mean, I left England because I wanted to leave the locus of the trauma, and I left England because as a Jew in England, I didn't feel entirely at home. And because we were Cohens, it was clear who we didn't hide anything, but I had no Jewish upbringing. My dad hated his bar mitzvah, I didn't have a bar mitzvah. I'm thinking of doing a bar mitzvah this year, which would be interesting. But, so really, I confront, when I went to high school, I started hearing all this fucking year, there was a row, I was effing year, Jew boy, whatever. And so something started to stir in me. And by the time I was at college, I went to Israel and spent time on the kibbutz. And so this Jewish identity, which is now a very strong part of my identity, began to grow. And strangely, I feel more South African, more Jewish, and now more American than I feel English. And Philip Roth observed that when people talk about Jews in England, their voices always drop just a little bit. And I remember my mother in this restaurant, St. John's Wood, pointing to a family, kitty corner across the way from us, saying, darling, that family over there, they're Jewish. And I said, Mom, why are you whispering? She said, I'm not whispering, I said, you are. And it's quite shocking, having lived in the United States for, I lived in New York for 10 years before we moved back, and I'm moving back again here in June. New York's really home at this point. But, you still hear, it's better than when I was growing up, but you still hear remarks like, oh, that's so Jewish. Well, what exactly does that mean? And very soon after I went back, I had a very strange incident with a guy who was actually a lodger for a while in my sister's house. And I'd been to dinner there, and now I've got an iPhone, but then the New York Times was giving us BlackBerries, so I had my BlackBerry. And I filed a column, and there was a playback, so at the end of dinner, I was looking at my BlackBerry. So this guy says to me, oh, you've got a Jewberry. I said, what, Craig? Yeah, Jewberry. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, well, BlackBerry Messenger. you know, on a BlackBerry, you can send a message to another BlackBerry. We could on this system called BBM, BlackBerry Messenger. I said, yeah, BlackBerry Messenger. What about BlackBerry Messenger? He said, well, it's free. So, you know, I just looked at him. I mean, what? Then he said he was joking or that I misunderstood, but it's bullshit, you know? I mean, who needs that? And I was talking to a friend, James Lasdon, who's a poet, a very good writer, and he was at Westminster with me. He wrote a rather good book called On Being Stalked recently. I don't know if any of you read it, but it's worth reading. And James had exactly the same feeling as I did when I arrived in New York, which was kind of, oh, you can be a Jew like this, you know, and you can live it exuberantly and openly. I don't want to exaggerate. I mean, Britain is the most open society in Europe, and 250,000 or however many Jews that in Britain do just fine, and there are no you know, overt obstacles. If you can put up with that little bit of prejudice that's always lurking there and decide not to make a fuss about it, you know, I think in general it's just kind of, you know, keep it discreet and, you know, and carry on. And even if you don't keep it discreet, nobody's gonna, you know, do anything. But it's a different way of living your Jewishness between Britain and New York. Certainly between Britain and New York, but I'd say in America in general.
We'll talk about that lie-low strategy as it pertains to South Africa and how many of your relatives and you, I think, came to view how apartheid relates to the whole issue of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, well, it was, you know, it was very interesting. You know, observing apartheid as a, well, absorbing really more than observing, because I lived there till I was 2, and then I would go back there every year. And my family tended to live in big houses in Johannesburg, and there was always this kind of shadow at the horizon. You know, the blacks were coming; they were gonna take over one day. There was going to be a bloodbath. I remember more than once a cousin saying, "Enjoy the swimming pools. Next year they'll be red with blood." And you know, I didn't quite get it because I didn't live there. I mean, sometimes I would sit on the wrong bench, and then I would look. Of course, apartheid, one of its particularities was that blacks lived far away in the Bantustans. Their families couldn't be anywhere near white areas. And yet, in the most intimate setting, the home, all the staff were black. So you were bathed by a black woman, you were fed by a black woman, and I would, you know, see these utensils set aside that were not for my use, but for their use, and I would see these little concrete outhouses with their baleful single windows, little windows, and you know, I would kind of wonder. I was trying to work it out, and I wasn't. But it was troubling. And in my family, there was one aunt, Joyce, who was in the Black Sash and was an anti-apartheid activist, and sometimes her home would get searched. But my grandmother, Flossie, lived the entire 20th century. She was born in 1900 and died in 2005. She lived to 104. And her husband, Laurie, was born in 1899 and died in 1998, so he lived to almost 100. There was really no better place to be in the 20th century for a Jew than South Africa, or very few. You know, they lived very good lives. And I think like most South African Jews, they went along. I mean, they might vote for Helen Suzman, but they probably secretly thought that, you know, if the National Party got back into power, which of course it always did, that was okay too. And you know, and the official Jewish community in South Africa, as I describe in the book, they went along with apartheid completely. I mean, they said it was a matter of private conscience what individuals did or said, but that they as an organization were not going to come out against apartheid, right until very near the end. That said, among whites, more Jews proportionately than any other community, and as you know, Mandela's lawyers, Maisels, Kentridge, they were all Jews, and many Jews South African Jews went to jail or into exile for their beliefs, more proportionate than among other people. And I tell the story of a young rabbi named Unger from Hungary, who has lived through the Holocaust, survived the Holocaust in Hungary. And he arrives in apartheid South Africa in the 50s, right around the time when my parents were about to leave. And he's horrified because there's so many echoes of the Holocaust. You know, the benches you couldn't sit on, just as he couldn't sit on certain benches in Budapest, the roads he could not travel on, and so on and so forth. And Unger was thrown out by the South African government. And clearly for my family, who went on to Israel, and that's one of the threats in the book. I mean, I don't use the apartheid analogy for what's going on in Israel-Palestine. I don't think, I mean, it was one system with its own characteristics, and I don't believe what Israel is doing is the same thing. But for any South African, when you're traveling in the West Bank and you find yourself on a road that only Israeli settlers, only Jews can use, and from which Palestinians are barred, or you observe the kinds of small humiliations that are part of life in the West Bank, you know, there are echoes. And I described this family, my family of cousins in South Africa. And my cousin one was very liberal, and her husband was a Likud, and they would fight. They were both South African, but they would fight over what was happening. That cousin, their daughter, I described her life in some detail. She was also manic depressive like my mother, and committed suicide in Tel Aviv. But I don't want you to think the book is too depressing. You know, I'm a hopeful guy myself, and you know, this was a story I had to tell. And but I think there is also a message. I mean, this love, and love comes through strongly too.
Well, it's a great story of love, of family love, I think. But take us now to a place you went to at least twice, several years apart, Lithuania.
Well, as I said, I knew really nothing about Lithuania, and so that was part of the research of the book. And I went back to the two towns where my grandparents and great-grandparents came from, both in the far north of Lithuania. Little towns, yeah, one slightly bigger than the other. One called Shavil, in Yiddish, Shole today, and one called Zagare. Shavil is pretty, it was destroyed in the war. It has nothing particularly endearing about it or attractive. Zagare has a certain charm. It's a beautiful town in beautiful forests, and it was famous for its cherries, and it's now attempting a revival through its cherry festival. And, my grandmother always talked about the Spangulju. This was a kind of joke among her children, including my dad. Spangulju means cranberries, and she used to pick the cranberries in the woods. Anyway, you know, Lithuania was in the Soviet Empire for 45 years after World War II, so everything was frozen in time, really, until 1990. So it's interesting to see really the former shtetl in that. There were no family records left, it was all destroyed. And all the Jews of Lithuania were killed very fast and killed locally. Before the final solution, they were killed between June and December, basically 1941. And they were shot in these towns, usually on the edge of towns, and then buried in mass graves. In my grandmother's town, Zagare, on Yom Kippur, on October the 2nd, 1941, 2,458 Jews were all shot dead, and women, children. This is where the Nazis went through the psychological barrier of killing women and children. They hadn't done it before the Baltics, which had initially, as you know, been part of it under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Baltic states were initially Soviet, and then Hitler came in and killed all the Jews. And this was before the camps or the gas chambers or anything had been established. So, you know, like in my family, things were concealed. Things were concealed in Lithuania too, because the Soviets had no particular interest in recording what had happened. So for a long time, the sign in the woods just referred to here lie 2,000 victims of fascism. And it was only after the end of the Cold War and Lithuania's independence, now 25 years ago or so, it was only after that that the sign was changed. But then another issue presented itself because the Nazis killed Jews with Lithuanian accomplices. Not all Lithuanians were accomplices by any means, but plenty were. Now, clearly, Lithuanians prefer to see themselves as victims of Stalin, as victims of Soviet totalitarianism, which they were, than as accomplices of the Nazis, which they were. And so it's one of those fascinating, historical struggles that is still playing out. Now toward the end of the book, I give an account of a ceremony in Zagreb, which took place a year and a half ago. And this was the first time ever in a provincial Lithuanian town that a plaque was put up on the main square, not out in the forest, where all the bodies were thrown into these mass pits, but on the main square saying, in this town, on October 2nd, 1941, 2,000, whatever the number is, 500 Jews were massacred by the Nazi occupying forces with Lithuanian or some Lithuanian accomplices or something. So it's taken 70 years. History, there was no worse place to be, really. I mean, Timothy Snyder's great book, Bloodlands, I don't know if you've read it, is all about the Baltic states, Ukraine, Belarusia, these places that were thrice occupied, first by Stalin, then by Hitler, then by Stalin again. And while the suffering in Western Europe was enormous during World War II, it paled in comparison to the mass butchery that took place in those bloodlands.
Take everybody to New Jersey with a kid in a barrel, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those, there's a chapter in the book that, I mean, not many people have read the book now, but if there was a chapter that I thought people might think, well, why is that in there? This would be that chapter. But they don't. They seem to like that chapter. What happened was...
It's a great chapter.
Yeah, what happened was that when I was in Zagreb, I was talking to a woman whose family had saved Jews, and one of the very few families. And on her table, she was looking through she's been recognized by the State of Israel now as among the righteous. And so there were these letters, and she started showing them. And one was a letter from New Jersey from a guy called George Gordimer. Nadine Gordimer, actually, her paternal family comes from Zagreb, but they're not related. Anyway, in this letter, George was saying, we're forever grateful to your family. Because George's entire family was saved, which was almost unheard of. Mother, father, and his brother survived, hidden by Lithuanian families. And he wrote that his family is forever grateful to them for saving them. And he was okay, but he'd suffered all his life from manic depression. And he was manic depressive, and it had been particularly bad of late. And so this, obviously, given what I told you, resonated with me. And I decided to track him down, which I did. And George is he's an amazing guy. He's a sort of doppelganger, because to get him into America, he's getting the family sailed to the United States about 3 or 4 years after the war on a ship called the Ernie Pyle, named after a famous journalist. And George, they pretended he'd been born in a different place. They changed his age a bit so that he could get more rations before he left for America. So his name was changed, his age was changed, his place of birth was changed. And he arrived in America, and he grew up in Trenton. And so I started to, and George is a guy, he always wears like a pale blue shirt, grey pants. He's small, he's thin. If you're thinking of kind of a guy who just disappears into a crowd, that's George Gordon. And you would never, he was hidden in a barrel in the ghetto in Charmel. That's how he initially survived when there was a Kinderaktion in 1943, when the Nazis went through the ghetto and just took 900 children away and killed them. And he and his brother were hidden in a barrel, and he suffered panic attacks ever since. I mean, these things don't go away. I mean, they don't go away. That kind of trauma is there all your life. There's no question in my mind about that, whatever treatment you have for it. So anyway, George told me his rather amazing story, and I've included it in the book. And he was very funny. He was at the book party last night, he and his wife. He's survived, he's had quadruple bypass. He's had, he's sort of a marvel. I don't know how he just survives and survives. He was there and he said, "Okay, Roger," and he'd had a couple of drinks. He said, "Okay, Roger, well, yeah, I'm manic depressive. It's true, I'm manic depressive. But you're manic. You are never in the same town for more than 2 days. And I have concluded that you are manic. You're probably in worse shape than I am." And then he went around, he was kind of getting his own money. He went around interviewing my daughter, who's a psychiatrist, and my other daughter, who's just finishing high school, and my son, who's about to go to Shanghai to do a semester abroad. He's studying Mandarin, he's at BU. And so George was getting the lowdown on me, and had concluded that I'm manic. So.
Well, who are we to dispute that? Well, now let's go on what in a sense is the final stop, if you don't count the United States, Israel, and your trip there, and how this whole review of your life has permeated the way you see the situation there, plus you have great experience there.
Yeah, well, the book is about identity, Jewish identity. I was raised without one, and I've grown into one, and I've grown more and more fascinated, troubled, exasperated by the situation in the Holy Land, and I've been there many times. I've actually been assigned there as a correspondent by the New York Times twice, and both times it hasn't happened. The first time because I was writing a book 25 years ago, and my editor wanted me to just set the book aside and go, and I said, "No, let me finish the book and then I'll go." And anyway, so the assignment was rescinded. And then I was going again in 2001. In fact, Frida and I, with the then very small kids, had traveled to Jerusalem, and we decided to do it. And then suddenly Joe Lillywell left. Howell Raines was. Anyway, suddenly they asked me to come back to New York to be deputy foreign editor, and then I became foreign editor on 9/11. It was announced September 10th. So instead of being in Israel, I was in New York when 9/11 happened as foreign editor. And anyway, in the book, I tell the story of this cousin of mine who had the same condition as my mother, and I tell it as a way of telling the story of Israel, of Zionism. I'm a Zionist. Quite reluctantly, but with great conviction. When you think about it, we're 120 years now from the Dreyfus affair, and Theodore Herzl was in Paris in the 1890s covering the Dreyfus case, and it wasn't the determining factor, but it was certainly a very important factor in his writing The Jewish State in 1896. Because he came to the conclusion, and this conclusion I also come to through the experiences of my family, whether in Lithuania, South Africa, my own experiences, that Jews need to be self-reliant. They need their own homeland because they can't. And now 120 years on, we've had 4 Jews killed in a kosher supermarket. 3 years before that, 3 Jewish children, a rabbi in the southern part of France. Zionism is almost a dirty word in Europe. If you say you're a Zionist, there's kind of a gasp of incredulity. It's like saying, I'm a colonialist bastard or something. But no, I'm a Zionist because I believe, on the basis, I don't think even Herzl could have foreseen the Holocaust. He foresaw the fact that Jews would not be accepted entirely ever. And I tell the story also in the book of one of my discoveries was about my great uncle, Michael Adler, who was a rabbi and was the chaplain to Jewish soldiers during World War I. And I found his diaries in a library at the University of Southampton, and in them he agonizes over, after this ultimate sacrifice, will Jews be fully accepted as being British like anyone else? We have demonstrated in this war, he was in Passchendaele giving last rites to Jewish soldiers. We've demonstrated that we are. And of course, British Jews did a lot better than German Jews or French Jews. I just feel there's no alternative. And that's why I'm a Zionist. But I'm a Zionist who believes that the founding charter of Israel in 1948 is very important, where it speaks of equal rights for all peoples. And I believe that, I don't believe Israel's right to exist comes from the Bible or some messianic claim to real estate. In fact, I'm appalled by that idea. No, it comes from international law as written down in the resolution of 1947, passed by the UN Security Council, calling for the establishment of two states, one Jewish, one Arab, in Mandate Palestine. And 65 years on from that date, Allan, there is still, in my view, no alternative to that. I mean, everything else is a pipe dream, and Jews were strangers in strange lands over millennia of diaspora experience. And to have a Jewish state that involves the statelessness of another people is not a state of affairs that's good for the Jews or good for anybody. It's certainly not good for the Palestinians. And so I believe very strongly in the need to keep trying to achieve what appears particularly impossible right now, which is a two-state outcome. All this one-state stuff is nonsense. The things that Palestinians are doing at the United Nations or eventually at the International Criminal Court may have some feel-good element to them. It won't resolve anything. It's not the right way to go. Palestinians need to achieve, in my view, national unity. They need unity in their cause, and Israelis and Palestinians need to talk to each other. That's the only way. And each side has to make very, very painful sacrifices, but it's doable. So it's interesting, just to conclude on that, in the United States, I tend to be criticized for being critical of Israel. That's to say, there are major Jewish organizations and many Jews who feel criticizing Israel is unhelpful. It plays into the hands of Israel's enemies, and you shouldn't do it. I don't take that view. I think, when I see the settlements expanding, I think there is a need for Israel to be criticized and prodded toward good faith attempts to reach a two-state peace. But when I'm in Europe, the criticism mainly comes from the other side. That you're a Zionist. Why? I mean, how can you be that? Why would you support Israel when it's doing all these terrible things to Palestinians in Gaza?
Well, you anticipated this question. Essentially, I was going to say that I'm sure in some quarters, why you describe yourself as a Zionist, you're regarded as the traitorous Cohen. Especially when you argue what to me makes perfect sense, that this constant annexation of West Bank property is the ultimate wrong way to go. But you're telling me, or us, and I unfortunately had the benefit of reading this, and you all will get his expanded views when you read this great book. I'm surprised, because I would have thought it would be the other way around, that you would be criticized in Israel, especially by the right, for your view that this annexation policy is crazy.
Well, I have been criticized in Israel, but there's very open debate in Israel. That's one thing. Maybe more so than here, I don't know, but certainly a lot. I mean, Haaretz is a very good left of center paper, which which the kinds of views I hold are regularly expressed. Then Sheldon Adelson has a free paper that's given away, and it's the biggest selling paper in Israel. And you may imagine that there's not much criticism of the settlers in that. In fact, the view basically is that all the land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River is Israel's. Why? Because it is. Because it was deeded to the Jews in the Bible, I guess. I don't see it that way. I've described the way I see it. And look, it won't solve. I saw Amos Oz recently, a great novelist, and he was saying, in a way, in the last 120 years, there hasn't been a moment like this, in the sense that the Saudis, Egyptians, even Assad in Syria, a lot of the Arab states are much more alarmed either by Iran or by ISIS than they are by Israel. They don't see Israel as a threat. And in that sense, maybe it's a moment that's quite propitious for trying to make peace. He also said, I said, but there's been 65 years of violence. He said, well, look at Europe, it took 1,000 years. The number of dead here since 1948 is nothing, compared to what went on in Europe for hundreds of years. And he keeps believing, keeps hoping. You need leadership, you need statesmanship. I wrote a review a couple of months ago of Lawrence Wright's book on Camp David, Carter, Begin, and Sadat. Begin had vowed he would never, ever give up the settlements in Sinai because the buffer in Sinai against the Egyptians was needed. Indeed, he had declared that he would retire to Sinai when he left office. And 13 days, these three leaders were sealed off from the world up in the hills of Maryland. And they threatened to leave, they packed their bags, and Carter kept pushing him. Everybody remembers Carter for Iran and the debacle of the attempt to rescue the hostages, but he did succeed in that. It was a partial achievement because it was just Egypt, Israel, but that was still a lot. And Sadat knew what he wanted. I often feel that Palestinians don't really know what they want. If you want something, you've got to know that you want it, and you've got to make the trade-offs needed to get it. And Sadat knew what he wanted. He wanted Sinai back. He wanted three things. He wanted Sinai back. He wanted an end to conflict with Israel, which had killed upwards of 100,000 Egyptians over the previous years. And he wanted to align Egypt with the United States, bring it out of the Soviet sphere and align it with the United States. And he achieved those three aims. He was assassinated for doing it, and he's bitterly criticized by the Palestinians for having sold them down the river, because there was a part of the Camp David Accords that was supposed to address the Palestinian issue, but it never did, because Begin broke his word. But I think that fierce pragmatism of Sadat, and the fact that the first right-wing Likud leader of Israel was the man who gave up territory, vowed never to give up. Those are lessons worth bearing in mind.
Before we throw this open to questions, I want to ask you one more question about the book, and then one other question, which may be on everybody's mind. Anyway, what is the most important thing about your book that you want to impart to your children? Have you told them something about it, or are you letting them sort that out for themselves as each one of them reads it?
They've read the book. My youngest two have read the book. My oldest son, who lives in Vietnam, is reading it, and I know Jessica will read it. I just got it quite recently. No, I don't want to sort of. I just want them to read it. And I said last night when I said a few words that I think it's important to know where you come from, and it's important for things to be open. I think it may be tempting to hide things, painful things, and there have been many painful things in my family, but I think in the end I don't think silence is good. And my hope is that it will be a foundation for my children to, build their lives and their happiness. And, I mean, on Frida, my ex-wife, she's from a family of survivors of the Holocaust. Her mother was in Poland during the war, hidden on a farm in Poland. And we explored this a lot when we were based in Berlin. And her mother's mother was killed in the camps, and all her family was wiped out. So, I mean, my children, the younger two, have a strong Jewish identity, and they know where they come from. They know who they are, and I think that's a very good thing. I had to work. I didn't quite know who I was.
Obviously, but the question, since you're currently a resident of Paris, is London. Oh, London, right? You were in Paris. What's your take on what's going on in Paris with Je suis Joe?
Well, I'm appalled. I mean, any journalist.
Did you know those guys?
No, I didn't, not personally. But I've sat in many a news meeting as foreign editor, discussing what we're going to put in the paper the next day, and the idea of sitting there around a table, looking at tomorrow's content, tomorrow's cartoons or stories, and two guys burst in and just shoot everybody dead in the name of some heinous ideology that says it's drawn from Islam. Yeah, I'm appalled, I'm worried. I think Europe's pretty combustible right now. It's dangerous, I'm troubled. There are a lot of factors. I was based in Germany for 3 years, from 98 to 2001. If you told me there'd be Germans in the streets chanting Jews are pigs, as there were during the Gaza war, I would have said, no way that's ever going to happen in Germany again. You've got large Jewish communities and large Muslim communities. The largest are in France, but also in Britain, in Germany, in Holland, Belgium. A depressed economy, generally high unemployment, and failure to integrate the Muslim communities, and plenty of failure on both sides, I'm sure, and Jews living with more and more fear. I mean, I read that during the summer that Jews were removing mezuzahs from their homes in Holland, and that made me feel so sick. And then, I read that shops in the Rue des Rosiers in Paris, in the Marais, the sort of heart of Jewish Paris, have been advised to close. I mean, historical echoes are more than evident. So I just hope there isn't another incident, because I think it's very, very volatile.
Anybody have a question for Roger? Please identify yourself. I know, but the camera doesn't. So.
Emma Daly, I was a journalist for many years, including with Roger in Bosnia. And I work for Human Rights Watch. One of the things you are as a reporter, relentlessly. So how does concealment in your family, did you become a journalist because of your family or in spite of your family? Is there a link?
Well, I've the years I spent with you, Emma, and in Beirut in the 80s and elsewhere, I found myself in war zones quite often, and I've done quite a lot of stories of kind of confused identity. I mean, one big story I did for Times about a priest in Poland who discovered late in life that he was really Jewish, and I think I did have a kind of empathy for, and I've always wanted to tell stories through people's psyches, through the imprint of big events on single human beings. And that's the way I wrote my book on Bosnia. It was about 4 families that fell apart. And so I think, it took me a long time to turn the gaze inward, but I was carrying quite a lot of pain from what had happened, and it was, and the way I deal with things as I'm a writer is word by word, and so I think I was turning some of that outward onto the world, and trying to tell stories. You're kind of suggesting because things were closed that I want to be revealing things. I mean, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I was always observing. I was always writing things down from a very young age, and I always often had this kind of feeling of living and watching myself live. And I think that's I think every writer or journalist has that, to some degree. There's always a sort of, you're living a situation and you're seeing it also as a story that you might tell, and so you're looking for certain details or elements that might contribute to that story. It's confusing for other people, it's because they don't live their lives like that, and it can be hurtful to other people. Czesław Miłosz, the Polish Nobel laureate poet, said that when a writer is born into a family, the family is finished. And I hope that's not the case, but there's a germ of an idea there. It's you're doing something different. You're observing, and that's, I think everybody has something that makes them tick, and in my case it's writing. Everybody has something. It's something that is the thing closest to their core.
Any other questions? I'll give you next.
Thank you, Roger. Edie Lederer from the Associated Press. I have two questions. One personal, which is, why at this age did you finally think about becoming bar mitzvah? And having lived in London myself, which Britain is basically in Jewish terms almost totally Orthodox, what have you become? Reformed, conservative, Orthodox? And
I think you know the answer. I hope you do.
But I think it's interesting. And my second question is related to what happened in France last week. Netanyahu has come under a lot of criticism for being in France and calling on French Jews to immigrate to Israel. I wondered, as someone who has lived many places in Europe, including in Paris, how you felt about that call.
I don't think I agree with you, Edie, about the Jewish community in Britain. There is a large, Orthodox component, but there's, my great uncle Michael Adler was the rabbi at West London, was a Reform synagogue, and where I've been going on high holidays. I only go on high holidays, but I'm not about to become an Orthodox Jew. I have become very interested in the whole Jewish story. I'd like to learn Hebrew. I've grown into a Jewish identity, and it's something I feel I want to explore further. And I think, this whole idea of this covenant with a formless, faceless God that was the Judaic contribution, I guess, to the history of the world. And God knows it's reverberated. I'm intrigued by that. I'm not religious, but I have a strong sort of cultural identification. I think a bar mitzvah might be quite interesting. Again, I'll be observing myself doing it. So, and no, I'll write a column about it. So prepare yourselves. There's a small miracle in the book, or maybe not so small, but you can't discount miracles, because my uncle Bert Cohen, who was an immense figure in my life, who died last year, and at the age of 95, he signed up for the Allied forces in Johannesburg, went to Egypt, sailed to Taranto in early 1944, and fought the whole Italian campaign with the Allies. And he was an amazing man. He became a professor of dentistry. But one thing I realized through his diaries was that he toyed very seriously with becoming a writer. And actually, the last thing he did before he died was to read through the manuscript and, as usual, correct my spelling mistakes. So that was good. But anyway, speaking of miracles, he was in Florence in 1944, and he was reconnoitering some site just outside Florence, and this little bird came along and landed on his shoulder. And the bird stayed there for 6 days. And he would walk around Florence with this bird on his shoulder. And the Florentines thought he was a saint, this young Jewish captain in Florence. And so they would come up to him and say, "È un santo, and they wanted him to bless their children. So he tried to recall the old mnemonic, spectacles, testicles, wallet, cigar, but he got it wrong a few times. Anyway, about 4 days into this remarkable saga, he encountered a US officer in the streets of Florence, and this came up and said, "Say, Captain, you've got a bird on your shoulder." And he said, "Yeah, I know, it's been there for 4 days." He said, "Holy shit, 4 days? Do you mind if I take a photograph?" But I said, "No, that's fine." So there's a photo at the end of chapter 1 of my Uncle Bert with his bird on his shoulder. And actually, I'll read just so it's on page. It's on page 28. It's on page 28. I mean, you can't, if you have the book, you can look on page 28. But anyway, at the end of the book, I'll just read this passage because it's really rather extraordinary. So then in his diary, I found this, this is right at the end of the book. Not 5 minutes, this is my Uncle Bert writing, not 5 minutes after the photograph had been taken, my bird took off and flew across the river that, as the photograph shows, is at least as wide as the Thames at Westminster. I watched it as it flew southward. He called the bird Ishbel, by the way. I watched it as it flew southward without so much as a backward glance. And in less than a minute, it was out of sight. I stood, dumbfounded, and waited for several minutes before resuming a lonely walk along the right bank of the Arno. I felt bereft. Some 15 minutes later, as I approached the Lucchese, I was looking out over the river when I saw a bird flying in my direction. Unbelievably, it alighted on my left shoulder. "Where on earth have you been?" I asked angrily, but without being able to suppress my elation. To this day, the question remains unanswered. So, while I'm not religious, I think one has to be at least somewhat mystical and concede that miracles do happen. Now, you asked about France and Netanyahu. Netanyahu's in an election campaign. Let us not forget this, and it's going to be a very tough campaign. And in my view, Herzog, the Labour Party leader, who's allied with Tzipi Livni, I mean, if one cares about Israel and the possibility of change in Israel, it's important to believe there can be political change. I won't say more than that, but I think everybody knows where my sympathies lie. And I think it was a political moment I mean, he went for genuine reasons, obviously, to mourn the 4 Jews shot down, indeed the journalists too, and they are being buried in Israel. French Jews have been leaving. I think it's been exaggerated slightly. It's not a mass exodus. There's still more than 500,000 Jews in France. I think Netanyahu should leave it to French Jews to decide if they want to go to Israel or not. Many are making that decision because the climate has become bad, and when shops are closing and you have soldiers gathered outside Jewish schools in France. I mean, this is an appalling situation. And then the Israeli economy has been booming, and the French economy is moribund. So if you're looking at your kids and thinking, where are my kids going to get a better life? Many have been making the call that they want to go to Israel. I hate to think what would happen if there was another major incident of some kind.
I'm Erin Hoover Barnett. I was with the Oregonian for 20 years. I was a Neiman Fellow with Emma and Santi Lyon, and lost my parents a little young, so I kind of relate on certain levels to your story. And what I'm wondering is if, in telling your mother's story and piecing that together, are you free or are you more sad?
I'm not more sad. I'm satisfied that I did what I set out to do, which is that I understand completely, or as well as I ever can, what happened to my family, and in particular, what happened to my mother. I know where she was on the eve of my 3rd birthday. I know how long she was in these institutions. Not all the medical records survived, but I know a lot more than I did, and it took me a very long time to find it out. And knowing all that, I would use the word acceptance. I've come to an acceptance of what happened. It's not in the nature of some great epiphany, but the acceptance does feel like it might herald peace down the road. There's still, it's something, there's a knot of emotion inside me related to my mother and what happened to her that is, whether that will ever unravel itself completely, I don't know. And in the book, there are these 2 imaginary conversations with my mother, in which I say some of the things I would have liked to say. But I won't spoil the book by telling you what's in those conversations.
Any other questions? I have one more final question then. What did you do in terms of reporting that was different from anything you've done before?
Well, it's a journalist book, I went to the places I was researching. I went to Lithuania, I went to South Africa, I went to Israel, UK. I found stuff. I found things in the British archives and the South African archives. I don't routinely go to the archives in my journalistic work, obviously. But this was a very different way of writing, feeling, thinking from. I mean, writing a column has been compared to living under a windmill. You avoid one blade, and the next blade is already coming to get you. It's pretty relentless. People say, "Oh, 2 800-word columns a week. That's nothing. What's your real job?" But it's a pretty exacting job, and I'm not somebody who can kind of write a book between 5 and 7 in the morning and then do my journalism and then come back to. It's a different side of my psyche. It's a different side of my sensibility. It's a different part of me, and so I I tried doing one column a week for a while to see if I could write in that way. It wasn't very satisfactory. And I was lucky enough that my bosses at the New York Times gave me enough time to really immerse myself in this story, which which took a lot of research, a lot of thinking about, and finding. It's a very intimate book. Finding a voice that was at once, intimate but not. It was never. I didn't want it to be sort of voyeuristic or. It was hard to, decide exactly how to pitch the tone, and also how to structure the narrative. So, all of that's part of the work of a writer, and that's what I was doing in this book. And those are issues that don't arise in the same way. Even, of course, as an opinion writer, you're writing your opinion, so it's personal. It's more personal than a lot of journalism, but it's not nearly as personal as that book.
Anybody else? Well, Roger, one more question.
I am Dr. Bronner Hussar. I'm 85 years old, and at my age, I am second generation woman, and the men go back much further on both sides of my family. My family had 3 professions, mainly physicians. They were international industrialists, and they were writers. A first cousin of my father was president of the Hungarian Writers Association, and so on.
What's your question for Mr. Cohen?
No question.
Thank you.
Roger, you were just fabulous. I can't remember the page citation, the one that says I am an atheist. So I'm looking forward to the atheist inviting everybody to his bar mitzvah. Anyway, it's really quite a tour de force, I think. And I don't know who doesn't yet have it, but hopefully everybody will.
Thank you very much.
Roger, so there's an OPC event tomorrow, I think. Is that right, Patty?
It's a mixer at the Half King, social time.
Bird stories.
Let me just have to
Oh, don't forget
Yeah.
I was in Lithuania and I was yeah, I like grandma's. My mother and who was a lots of houses.